After Colony 195, as part of Operation Meteor, certain rebellious colonies sent 5 Gundams down to Earth. For many, these Gundams would become a curse, but for others, they would become a source of inspiration. And one of these people who was inspired by them was the former Oz commander Trace Kushranada. By most people, Oz was simply known as the Specials, the Special Forces unit of the Alliance. But behind the scenes, Oz was actually the military wing of the illustrious Rockefeller Foundation, an aristocratic organization that was originally set up to alter world events for profit, but eventually they just straight up wanted world domination, something that they then seek to achieve through Oz. And their leader at the time of Operation Meteor was Trace Kushranada, a man who valued chivalry and honor above anything else. And as an extension of this, he believed that war should be fought by humans. A belief that would set him on a crash course with the higher-ups of the Rockefeller Foundation. At some point during the conflict with the Gundams, Chief Tuberov completed the Mobile Doll system, an AI system that was capable of controlling mobile suits, and it was able to do this to a much higher degree than the average human. This then led to the obvious end result. The Rockefeller Foundation was completely on board with this system and wanted it to be implemented as soon as possible. No more need for humans meant that combat was cheaper and also less morally difficult. You no longer had to rationalize the potentially wasted human lives because you were simply sending machines into battle, almost like a video game. For Trace though, this was an absolute travesty, and he tried to do whatever he could to convince the Rockefeller Foundation not to implement the Mobile Doll system, as in his mind, it would lower the meaning of a war. After all, what would truly be achieved if you made it to your goal without any suffering? These arguments did not sway the Rockefeller Foundation, and his continued opposition to the Mobile Doll system would lead him to step down from his role as Oz's commander, and he would even be placed under house arrest in a castle in Luxembourg. So I really hope he had a VPN like NordVPN to dodge those pesky region locks and get some extra security while browsing online. And if you don't have Nord yet, by using the code kkrt or link down below, you'll not just get a sweet discount, but you'll also be supporting the channel. But so, this house arrest did not change his mind one bit. If anything, it gave him the time and the space to give form to his hatred for the Mobile Doll system. During his time at the castle, he would design 2 mobile suits, the Epyon and the Aquarius. The Epyon was designed as Trace's ultimate ideal of a soldier, or perhaps a knight would be more fitting. Using the data he acquired from the 5 Gundams and the Tallgeese, he created a mobile suit that was outfitted with only close-range weapons. But these were some of the most powerful weapons around, especially its main weapon, the beam sword. Unlike basic beam sabers, this sword was much larger and it was connected to the hip with a power cord. This meant that it could be directly powered by the Epyon's generator, making it much more powerful than a standard beam saber. And on top of that, this allowed for the output to be adjusted on the fly, with the highest setting making the sword even capable of cutting through a heavily fortified base like barge. And when not in use, it could be stored on the right skirt armor. Its second main weapon then was mounted on the shield. This shield was made out of Gundam alloy, just like the rest of the machine, but it was also treated with an anti-beam coating to make it even more resistant against beam weapons. And on the tip, it had the heat rod, a whip-like weapon that consisted of various segments that could be superheated to cut through enemies like a hot knife through butter. And not even the state-of-the-art Virgo mobile dolls were a match for this weapon. Alternatively, it could also trip up enemies, or it could entangle them. And when not in use, it could be retracted. Although it should be noted that this retraction feature was never actually seen in the anime and only appears in later media like video games and model kits. Its final weapons then were the Epyon claws mounted on the forearms. These were capable of ripping through enemies, and they would also serve as the landing gear for the Epyon's mobile armor mode, which is something that it also had. It could transform into a flying mode that is believed to have been inspired by the transformation of the Wing Gundam. But rather than transforming into a bird-like mode, the Epyon transformed into something resembling a twin-headed dragon. Unfortunately for the Epyon though, because all of its weapons were close combat weapons, it didn't really have any offensive capabilities while in this mode. It mainly served to quickly move from place to place, and also allowed the Epyon to undergo atmospheric re-entry. But there was one more weapon that the Epyon was seemingly outfitted with. During its final battle with the Wing Zero, Vulcan guns were fired at the Wing Zero by an off-screen mobile suit. But at this time, the only other mobile suit in the vicinity was the Epyon. So logically, that was the only mobile suit that could have fired those Vulcan guns. This then led to the theory that at some point the White Fang must have added a pair of Vulcan guns to the Epyon to give it some kind of long-range weapon. But, Vulcans or no Vulcans, the Epyon's close combat weapons were really all it needed thanks to two main reasons. The first was its speed and agility, and the second was the Epyon system, a specialized combat system that was either based on the Zero system or developed from it. The specifics aren't known, but practically, it functions the same as the Zero system. So as a result, it shared the same strengths, but also the same weaknesses. In theory, the system gathers information from all of the sensors on the mobile suit, analyzes this data, and then feeds the conclusion of this analysis directly to the pilot's brain. And where the Epyon system differed from the Zero system was that Trace also developed a brand new pilot suit and helmet to go along with it. This so-called data helmet could then feed the data from the Epyon system more directly into the pilot's brain, which in theory would increase their combat effectiveness even more. But now we get to the downsides of the system. It fed so much data to the pilot that it could easily overwhelm them if they weren't mentally strong enough. And the Epyon had a lot of sensors at its disposal to feed into the system. In addition to the usual head-mounted cameras, it also had a search eye on the chest and something called mobile armor eyes on the feet. The search eye was based on the fighting sight sensors on the Shenlong Gundam and was a dedicated close combat sensor, which could pick up things that the main camera or the V-fin antenna couldn't. And based on its placement on the mobile suit, it no doubt also got some inspiration from the Wing Gundam as well. The mobile armor eyes, though, are something that we know almost nothing about. They're mentioned by name in the manual of the 1/100 scale high-grade kit, but they're never explained, nor do we get an explanation for them in any other sources. Based on their name and placement though, they were most likely the main sensors in mobile armor mode, and then could potentially play a secondary role in mobile suit mode. All of this data feedback then was so intense that it could easily drive the pilot mad, and a nasty side effect of this were hallucinations. The main thing that both the Zero system and the Epyon system did were suggesting the best course of action to the pilot. And these systems would suggest these actions so aggressively that they would sometimes manifest themselves as those hallucinations. Again, these suggestions were beamed directly into their heads. And the biggest problem with these best course of action suggestions was that they were based purely on achieving victory. All other consequences be damned. Another problem was that the system was also brutally honest, as we saw with the Zero system. When it calculated that its pilot sucked and had no real chances of victory, it had no qualms suggesting that his best course of action was to blow himself up to at least take out the enemy with him. All of that being said though, if the pilot was up to snuff, the Epyon system would greatly increase their combat performance. And on top of that, it even had a bit of a therapeutic effect. Just like the Zero system, it was capable of showing the pilot who their true enemy was, and it could help them move forward by showing them several different possible futures. Which one they chose, though, was up to the pilot. But these could also cause hallucinations, and not all futures presented were equally pleasant. As for the cockpit then, for such a complex, high-performance mobile suit, it might look surprisingly barren with just a single monitor in front of the pilot. But this wasn't the main monitor. That one was inside of the data helmet, which kinda served as like a VR headset for the pilot, while also feeding them all of the data from the Epyon system. The monitor inside of the cockpit then was just a sub-monitor, which could be used while cruising in mobile armor mode. But for some reason, Zex decided that this sub-monitor was enough for his final battle against the Wing Zero. The first pilot for this fearsome mobile suit then was Hiro Yui, and he was able to use it to great effect. But he would later on trade the mobile suit with Zex for the Wing Zero, because piloting a mobile suit gifted to him by Trace just didn't sit well with him. The Gundam pilots were at war with Oz after all, and even though Trace was now under house arrest by Oz, feelings don't change that quickly. So after this trade, Zex became the main pilot of the Epyon, after which he would also become the leader of the White Fang, turning the Epyon into one of the main symbols of their resistance. But of course, Zex wasn't the leader who was simply going to issue commands from the safety of an office far removed from the battlefield. Just as Trace had intended for the Epyon, Zex would use it on the front line to lay waste to Oz's mobile dolls. Something that Trace was then probably less amused by was that Zex wasn't just fighting alongside other mobile dolls, he was using the Epyon to actively control them. Together with the White Fang, he came up with a new system for the mobile dolls that allowed them to be controlled by the Epyon system, effectively allowing Zex to use them as accessories of the Epyon, which then greatly increased his combat performance. He now had heavy firepower at his disposal, and even extra defensive options in the form of the Virgo 2's Planet Defensors. Plus, it also made the mobile dolls under his command into more formidable fighting machines as well. On their own, their one big downside was that their programming was rather simple, for lack of a better word, making them very predictable for ace pilots like the Gundam team and Trace. But now with a human controlling them, defeating them was no longer so straightforward. But in the end, no matter how powerful the Epyon was, it would be defeated by Hiro and the Wing Zero. And after Zex seemingly sacrificed himself, it would go out in a bang, never to be seen again. In the continuity of the TV series, because despite not appearing in the Endless Waltz OVA, we do have the so-called Endless Waltz version of the Epyon, which was then used for the Glory of the Losers manga and the Frozen Teardrop light novels. Out of all of the Endless Waltz versions though, the Epyon probably has the least amount of changes. In fact, if you just look at the mobile suit profiles side by side, you're probably going to be hard pressed to find any changes at all. The armor looks a bit sharper, there's teeth-like designs on the front skirts and the thighs, and the wings now open up slightly differently. The biggest change though is that the feet, which function as the heads in mobile armor mode, now have a mouth, so they can chomp down on enemies and make the mobile armor mode feel that much more like a dragon. When Zex joined the White Fang then, the Epyon Endless Waltz version would get a little bit more than just some Vulcans. Through Dorothy, Trace delivered the brand new Sturm und Drang equipment to Zex. They look like smaller versions of the Epyon's wings and are made with technology from the Mercurius' Planet Defensors. And in mobile suit mode, the Sturm und Drang could be used in two different configurations. First up, they could be attached to the arms for Defensor mode. Here they would generate a strong electromagnetic field, just like the Mercurius' Planet Defensors, that was capable of blocking virtually any enemy attack. And it even once tanked an attack from the Wing Zero's Twin Buster rifle. And secondly, they could be attached to the Beam Sword for Zweihander mode. But despite the name, the Epyon would still mainly use this sword with one hand. It's just that the beam blade was now much larger, comparable to the high output version of the TV version. To power the Sturm und Drang then, both wings had an energy cable that was connected to a socket on the back skirt, which presumably connected it directly to the unit's generator. Because the thing is, the beam sword, which was supposed to be connected directly to the generator, was now also connected to that same socket. And because the Sturm und Drang was mounted on the forearms in Defensor mode, the shield was also mounted on the back skirt, covering and protecting that socket. When the Epyon then transformed into mobile armor mode, the beam sword and the Sturm und Drang were also stored on the back skirt, so there's definitely a lot going on with that back skirt when the Sturm und Drang was equipped. But that was it for differences in equipment and weaponry, so on to the story differences we go. And first of all, we have to go back to the past. For the TV version, it was said that the transformation was based on the wing's bird mode. But in Frozen Teardrop, it was said to be based on a different machine, the Wyvern. It was built a long time ago by J. Null, who we all know better as Dr. J, but unfortunately, we don't know too much about this thing. It was outfitted with a prototype version of the Zero system, it looked like a silver version of the Epyon in its mobile armor mode, and then after Colony 145, it was piloted by Katrina Peacecraft. Relina Peacecraft's great aunt, who just so happened to look exactly like her. Because Frozen Teardrop. But so, the true origin of the Epyon potentially goes way back, and Frozen Teardrop also made some alterations to its end. Rather than disappearing into thin air, the Epyon was salvaged and repaired at the Lanogreen Republic on Mars. The Epyon was renamed to Epyon Ares, and it now got twin beam cannons installed on its feet, which could only be used in mobile armor mode. Also, the restored left arm was supposedly in silver, but in the one image we have of the Ares, we can see that it's painted back to its normal colors. As for its pilot then, it was Zex, but not really Zex. It was a hologram created by the Epyon system based on all of Zex's data and thoughts that it still had. So it's like an AI hologram copy of Zex, which also became the commander-in-chief of the Lanogreen Republic. This Epyon would then phase off against another Epyon called the Epyon Bai. But for more information on that machine, you can check out my development history of the Shenlong and the Altron Gundam. In short, it was a replica Epyon with weapons based on the Shenlong and Altron Gundams. And while that was it for the Epyon, we still have to go over its sister unit, the Aquarius. Whereas the Epyon was meant to symbolize Trace's ideal soldier, the Aquarius was meant to symbolize Trace's hatred for mobile dolls. Two sides of the same coin that were meant to operate together. The main feature of the Aquarius was its anti-mobile doll system that sent a computer virus to every mobile doll in a 10-kilometer radius. And while they were blue screening, the Epyon could move in and take out the manned command units. The downside of this system for the Aquarius though was that it was extremely bulky and very energy consuming. It got massive thrusters to allow it to keep up with the Epyon, and it could even fly in the atmosphere, but because of its bulk, it did lack agility. As for its weapons, because the anti-mobile doll system was so energy intensive, it wasn't equipped with any beam weapons, and its only standard weapons were two built-in heat rods. For ranged weapons, it could optionally be outfitted with the conventional weapons used by the Leo, like a Dober gun or a 105mm machine gun. And it could also be outfitted with the Leo shield, although it's not certain if it could also use the beam sabers that were typically mounted on that shield as well. Whether or not the Aquarius was ever built then is up for debate. While Trace was under house arrest, he could only finish the blueprints of the machine, and it's not certain what happened to those afterwards. According to one theory, the pro-Mobile Dolder male faction got their hands on them, and then of course made them disappear. But according to another theory, the Trace faction got them and actually began work on the machine. But unfortunately for them and the Aquarius, it wasn't able to be completed in time for the final battle of the Eve Wars, and so it never saw any action. And let's wrap things up with two very much non-canonical versions of the Epyon Epyon Kai and the Epyon Kaiser. The Epyon Kai is a unit that appeared exclusively in the Gundam Combat card game as an upgraded version of the standard Epyon. Its armor has been overhauled a bit, the color scheme is more reddish and orangey, and instead of a beam sword, it's now using a twin-sided lance. But its biggest upgrade was done to the backpack. It's more elaborate and gives the Epyon Kai a speed boost of 180%, probably making it one of the fastest machines in the After Colony era. If it was real, that is. But in an alternate timeline, I could totally see Zex using this during Endless Waltz instead of the Tallgeese 3. On to our second totally non-canonical mobile suit then, the Epyon Kaiser. And this thing wasn't even really made to be serious to begin with. It was drawn by this person, and the two big differences with the standard Epyon was that it now got a much more heroic color scheme, inspired by the Dragon Kaiser, and it got a face inspired by the X-Kaiser. With the joke here being that both Gundam Wing and Brave X-Kaiser had designs made by Kunio Okawara. And believe it or not, this thing even got some backstory. The Wing Kaiser is being attacked on all sides by a massive Oz force, and just as all hope seemed lost, a shadow appeared on the horizon. Both friend and foe alike stared at it, as it transformed into a mobile suit with lightning roaring in the background. "Wing Kaiser," he yells, "you can leave the rest to me. Epyon Sword Double Dragon Slash. This ends now. Epyon Final Genocide. All enemies are swallowed up by a powerful beam. I hope you are okay, Wing Kaiser. If you're ever in trouble again, just say the word. But until then, this is farewell. Change!" The Epyon Kaiser changes back into mobile armor mode and flies off into the distance. And not only does this backstory tell us that the Wing Kaiser exists, it also tells us that the Epyon Kaiser can combine with the Altron to become the Altron Kaiser Four-Headed Dragon. And that has been all for the Epyon and the Aquarius' development history. Their time in the limelight might have been short, but the Epyon sure made it count. So let me know down below which machine you prefer for Zex, the Tallgeese or the Epyon. And if you prefer the Epyon, do you think you should have kept using it during Endless Waltz as well? Don't forget to check out NordVPN with the code kkrt or the link down below. As always, a big thank you to the Patreon supporters. I hope everyone watching has a great day, and I'll see you all next time.